Daniel Turner. He's the founder and executive director of Power the Future. We want to get his assessment of the so-called Green New Deal embraced by the likes of Elizabeth Warren and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. What exactly does the Green New Deal call for? And what would it cost? And how would it change our lives? And Daniel, thanks so much for being with us.
Greg, thanks for having me on again. It's always a pleasure.
Well, we're finally starting to see some of the details for this program that Ocasio-Cortez has described in general terms for a number of months now. It calls for the end of the fossil fuels industry entirely, including natural gas. It calls for the end of non-electric cars by the year 2030. There's more, but let's start there. I know you disagree vigorously, obviously, with this agenda. You're a pro-market energy type thinker. But what comes to mind when you hear those ideas?
Socialism, I guess, is the number one deal. They call it the Green New Deal, and it's under this sort of guise of caring about the environment. But the Green New Deal also talks about things like a guaranteed living wage for all Americans, guaranteed job for all Americans, free education, free health care. So the environmental part, and this is what the left does a lot, right? They take something like the earth and say, everyone wants a clean earth, and we want a clean earth. You want clean air and clean water, as do I. But then they sneak in all of these other provisions that have nothing to do with green or new. Well, it sounds like the New Deal of FDR, right? It is just an over-encroachment of government in the lives of the Americans, and that's why they try to hide some of those other details.
Yeah, a lot of programs in there, and it's pretty tough in a short period of time to really dig into all of them. But your expertise is energy policy, so let's spend most of our time there. What would actually happen if we banned oil, coal, and natural gas entirely in just over a decade? What would the impact be?
Yeah, I mean, basically America would cease to exist, as would the rest of the world, for that matter. On 60 Minutes last Sunday, Representative Ocasio-Cortez said that she has a goal of shutting down all fossil fuels within 12 years. You just can't take a proposal like that seriously. It sounds like a child is trying to be at the adult table. And then to say, well, we'll just use electric vehicles. Well, what runs the electric plants that charge those vehicles? What forges the steel that makes those vehicles? Coal does, right? You forge steel at high temperatures. And so it is this pie in the sky sort of proposal. But when you ask her for specifics, again, she reverts back to the platitudes of we need to care for the earth, we need to care for the environment. It is an absolutely nonsensical statement to say we will ban fossil fuels in 10 years. And proof of that is just look at the way these people live their private lives. Bernie Sanders was caught spending $300,000 in the month of September and October on private jets, flying to campaign for green candidates. Well, if Bernie Sanders gets to use a private jet, why can't the rest of us, right? So it's always funny how these people who push these philosophies exempt themselves in their personal practice of how they're going to live.
We're talking with Daniel Turner of Power the Future. And Daniel, let's pretend for a second that you actually could, within a decade or so, or even 20 or 30 years down the line, doesn't really matter on the specific timetable, get to the point where there's no fossil fuels. Is there any point that you see where renewable energies, obviously just the existing ones at this point, who knows what could be developed down the line, could come close to matching the energy that's provided through fossil fuels?
I have great faith in the American spirit and innovation and technology, and I named my organization Power the Future because I believe that we have a brighter tomorrow without a doubt. But right now we are not there. And just, again, simple points to talk about. There is no wind turbine factory that runs on wind turbine. There is no solar panel manufacturing plant in the world that runs on solar panel, right? They are still using fossil fuels to generate these alternative energies. Will they ever supplant? Can we get to the point that electric batteries are so great? Maybe. But my point and my concern is that in the process of trying to discover these perfect energy sources, we can't hurt regular folks, men and women, the poor, the elderly, the sick. When the electric grid fails, who are the ones who always suffer? In the extreme heat and the extreme cold every year, we see the people who die. It's the sick, it's the old, it's those who are abandoned, it's the poor, right? How can we risk the electric grid by saying let's run it completely on solar or on wind, and if it fails, what happens to those folks, right? And what about the jobs of just regular folks, for example, in Appalachia, who all have been decimated by Obama's war on coal? They don't have jobs now. They have opioid crises. Does anyone care about them? Right. So these are the trade-offs that Ms. Ocasio-Cortez needs to look at as she advances this agenda.
Dan, if they can't match the capacity, then obviously there'd be a lower supply. The demand wouldn't really change much. So what kind of cost would we be looking at just for energy?
Yeah, exactly. Look at the average cost of gas right now in America. It is pretty low. Everyone knows, your listeners are smart folks. They know that the world oil market, it is a global commodities market, right? Venezuela is down about 600,000 barrels a day because of their socialist experiment. OPEC is cutting. Libya has dealt with some terrorism issues that have cut production there tremendously. And yet with the world production numbers dropping, America is producing so much at the same time that we are offsetting the world, and gas prices for the average person is low. That's something to celebrate, right? Isn't that something to be proud of, America and American workers and American ingenuity, and the great abundance we have of oil and gas in this country? The way we live our lives, the way that the products that we use, last year was record for travel. That comes with a good economy. People pick up their kids and their spouses, and they travel around the world. Until we are ready to change the way we live our lives, which I don't think Americans are, to then say, well, we're just going to change the actual power that runs our economy, it would be chaos. You want proof of that? Look at France. Look at those yellow vest protesters. That came because President Macron said, in the name of climate change, we are raising gas to over $7 a gallon, equivalent in American dollars. And there were riots on the street. People literally died at those protests because the average Frenchman said, I cannot afford $7 a gallon gas because you want to fight the Don Quixote windmills of climate change. What would happen in America if that mandate came from our politicians? It would be chaos.
No, we got up to $4 gas, I guess, out west and some other places, maybe even above $5 at certain points. But yeah, there would be fierce protests and big problems for any politicians in favor of that policy. Just to finish on the fiscal side here, she's obviously talked, meaning Ocasio-Cortez, of 70% top marginal tax rates. The Green New Deal also calls for paying for this in part by cutting the military in half and bringing all troops home who are stationed overseas. So not just in terms of our energy bills, but what are taxpayers looking at here if even a big chunk of this gets through, much less the whole thing?
Yeah, we're finally at a point that our tax rates have come down. Our corporate tax rates have come down. And again, look at the response. Look at the unemployment numbers. Look at our growth numbers, our quarterly growth numbers, and take the stock market out of the picture. The market goes up and down. But Americans financially are in so much better shape right now. What will happen if we start paying, if a certain percentage start paying 70% taxes? Democrats and the left have always pushed this narrative that if only, as she said, we started paying our fair share, would this cover it? And again, if she voluntarily, she now makes about $180,000 a year, pretty good as a single woman at 29. You could almost say she's in the 1%. So if she will volunteer to pay more taxes, maybe I'd give her a little bit of credit. But if she's not going to, then I find it odd that she will mandate that government force the rest of us to pay more taxes. Again, these are policies that are kind of scary. Their vagueness makes them even scarier because they don't point out specifics. They just stay with platitudes and ethereal phrases like jobs and green and growth. But when you dig down into it, it's just a whole lot of shovel-ready jobs, stimulus, disguised socialism that we've seen in the past, and it always fails.
Dan, last 30 seconds here. Do you have any concerns that this could be the outlier, and whether it's a Democratic presidential candidate or leading Democrats in Congress say, well, look, public, I'm not going way out here where this person is. I'm right here with a much more moderate, sensible plan that everybody should be able to agree with, which is perhaps to the right of the Green New Deal, but it's pretty much in a standard position of where the Democrats have been on the environmental agenda all along. So in other words, is the pendulum going to move a little bit to the left because this proposal is so far to the left?
It will, and the grandfather or the godfather of this proposal is Tom Steyer, the hedge fund, a mega donor, billionaire, who dropped $120 million in the last cycle. He will push the party further to the left. The Green New Deal will be to the Democrats what the Iraq War was to the Republicans in 2004. It will be the litmus test to divide whether or not you stand with us in the party or whether you should be shunned. And with Tom Steyer's promise of tens of millions of dollars, you are going to see this whole field move to the crazy, crazy environmental left.
Dan, thanks very much for your time today. We appreciate it.
So great to be on again with you. Thank you.
Daniel Turner is the founder and executive director of Power the Future. I'm Greg Corombos, reporting.